Here's a brief segment having to do with the concept of level of measurement. Before we talk about level of measurement, it can be helpful to discuss what we mean by a variable. In the previous segment, if you watched that one, I recommended always thinking about what the root of a word is, if you're not sure what it might mean. When it comes to the word variable, the root is vary, something that varies. But when it comes to defining what a variable is, it's not quite enough to say, oh, well, a variable is something that varies. Rather, when we think about variables, I really like the definition that Spatz gives in your textbook. I won't quote it exactly, but it goes very closely something like this. A variable is something that comes in more than one form or more than one amount. Now, in the social sciences, we measure variables. We assess variables. We use variables to discover things about social groups, about social interaction. And so it's very common for us to talk about variables, and we will talk about variables quite a bit in this class. So first and foremost, when you think about variables, variables are things about our world, things about people, things about groups that we measure. Variables are things that we measure. And again, going back to Spatz's definition, variables are things that come in more than one form or more than one amount. Now, for the purposes of this class, there are really three levels of measurement. So if I gave you a variable, you should hopefully at some point this week be able to define on what level that variable is measured. Now, if you've had a research methods class before, you might have encountered this material in previous lessons and previous reading. There are four levels of measurement that are recognized, and they are nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. And if you want a handy way of remembering that, depending on how handy this is, NOIR, nominal, ordinal, interval, ratio, noir, which also is the French word for black. That's how I always remember NOIR, nominal, ordinal, interval, ratio. For the purposes of this class, though, we're going to observe three levels of measurement. And we're going to do that by simply combining interval and ratio. So for us, there will be three levels of measurement: nominal, ordinal, and interval ratio. We're going to treat that as one category. A nominal level variable. Yes, I'm old school. A nominal level variable, well, here's an example of a nominal level variable, and that is the variable of sex. Now, this is a very crude measure of sex given today's discussion when it comes to issues regarding transgender issues and intersex and all things related to gender and sex as a continuum. But this is an example of sex measured as a dichotomy. You're probably pretty familiar with it. There are two categories, female and male, according to this example. And the word nominal simply means to name. We're simply using two names to identify the categories within this variable. So sex is the variable. Sex can vary, and according to this, there are only two options. Although, again, I fully recognize it's quite a rudimentary conceptualization, but female and male. Now, those names don't really mean anything. Those are just the words we use, male and female. We could have used any other two words because the words really have no meaning. The meaning comes in what we attach to those names, but that's a different class. That's nominal. Ordinal uses names too. Consider this variable. This variable asks, how much do you like rhubarb? And as you can see, there are three sets of words: not at all, somewhat, and love it. Now, if I were to answer this question, I would say not at all. I'm not a fan of rhubarb at all. But we have three categories that we would ask if this was a real question. We're asking people to categorize themselves into three categories. So answer the question to yourself. How much do you like rhubarb? Not at all, somewhat, or do you love it? Now, the difference between nominal and ordinal is that with this variable, we could actually rank order how much somebody likes rhubarb using these categories. I'm fairly confident that someone says that they love rhubarb. They like rhubarb more than somebody that said they only somewhat like rhubarb, and they definitely like rhubarb more than somebody that says they don't like rhubarb at all. So we could rank order these responses in terms of how much somebody likes rhubarb, but that's really all we can do. We can't measure the exact distance between people who say love it versus people who say somewhat, and we can't measure the difference between somewhat versus people who say not at all. So this is ordinal level measurement. How much do you like rhubarb? 3 categories. Now some people say, well, perhaps we could increase the level of measurement by using numbers instead of categories for our ordinal level measurement. Well, let's take a look at an example of that. Here's the same question. How much do you like rhubarb, except now I have a continuum, 1 through 10. Circle the number that applies to you. If you like rhubarb a lot, maybe you would circle an 8, 9, or even a 10 if you really like rhubarb. Now, if it were me, I would circle a 1 because I actually hate rhubarb. But the point is, some people say, well, now that we're using numbers, can we say that this is a higher level of measurement? Is it somehow bringing this variable beyond ordinal level measurement? And the answer is no. Because the question I have is, let's say that you answered this at your desk and you said, you know what, I don't love rhubarb, I don't hate rhubarb, I'm like a 5, okay? So you're a 5 and I'm a 1. Okay, that makes sense, right? What's the difference between 5 and 1? Well, the difference is 4, right? Well, my next question is, for what? For rhubarb units? I mean, my point is that the distance has no real meaning. In other words, we don't know exactly what differentiates a 1 versus a 2 versus a 3 versus a 7 versus a 10. So even though my point with this slide is simply that even though we're using numbers, we're still dealing with ordinal level data because we cannot measure the distance between the categories. Last but not least, interval ratio. How old are you? Answer that question to yourself, right? If I were to answer this question, I would say I'm 47. If you were answering this question, maybe you said I'm 27, all right? Well, my name then is 47. Your name is 27. We can also rank order ourselves in terms of who's older and who's younger, or who's younger and who's older. But the difference now is that we can measure with precision the exact distance between us. So if I said 47 and you said 27, what's the difference between 47 years old and 27 years old? The difference is 20 years. And that makes sense. That has real meaning. 20 years is a unit that makes sense. So in sum, we've got three levels of measurement for this class: nominal, ordinal, and interval/ratio. Nominal is simply using names. Religion is another common nominal level variable. Political party is another common nominal level variable. Ordinal level measurement, we're still using names. We're still asking the survey respondent, or however we're gathering data, we're still asking the person to provide us with a label or a name. But the difference is that we can take those names and we can rank order them somehow that makes sense. Like, how much do you like rhubarb? Or how much do you support gun control versus not? And things of that nature. Interval ratio, on the other hand, we've got names. We can rank order. But the value added to interval ratio is that we can measure with precision the distance between the answers, the distance between the categories.